All right, let me close all these.
Mark and Tim. Still talking about starting a podcast.
Well, there it is, Mark. We're still talking about starting a podcast.
Are we live?
Yeah. What is the point with a countdown here?
So
people?
unprofessional,
This
right? This isn't the first episode anymore, right? We should know what we're doing by now.
Well, I think we're doing. I would say that it should be a marketed. Well, and the truth is, if you're listening to this as a podcast and not the video, hopefully the audio is even better. We'll see. We're trying to figure out the audio, trying to increase the level, the quality level on the audio, and just get everything better. Now, if you're watching the live stream audio is not going to be better. That's going to be what it is. Sorry.
And to talk about audio, Tim, you're the one thing I forgot to do.
Did you forget to hit record?
I forgot to hit record.
So the next podcast, not this one, but the next one, the audio is going to be better. This one, probably not.
It's a process. You have to get used to this new system with you. It's like a new marriage, right? It'll take us a few years to get used to each other.
That's a few years. Okay. Well, that's what we're in for here then. All right.
How you been, Tim? How's your week?
Well, this is because Mark had some things he wanted to share and wanted to make sure he didn't tell me beforehand because we don't talk except for the podcast, and we feel like that is going to be the thing that makes this work. Is that this is just two developers talking at the end of a week about whatever it is that they're doing and about life and about being a developer and all that kind of fun stuff.
I agree, because Tim, I would like to welcome you to the third show of the greatest developer podcast on the planet.
Yeah, let's not oversell it. Greatest developer podcast.
You're aware of the secret, right? You know about the secret?
I feel like I should, but
you probably have heard about it at some point. Where if you envision where you want to be, what you want to have, what you want to do, but you just don't envision it. You say to yourself, "We're there."
Is it a vision board? Is that what I need now?
No. We have the greatest developer podcast on the planet,
and then it'll happen.
It just happens then.
It just happens because we believe it to be so. I feel like there's some people that believe a lot to be so, and it doesn't actually happen. But
I think with you and me, I think it can happen.
Of course it will. So I had an interesting conversation last night. It's one of those things. I was talking to a friend of mine at church, and he's a teacher, and he's he's trying to start a tabletop game club. At his school. He teaches at a community college. Or no, it's high school. Sorry, a high school. Mm-hmm. And I was telling him how you do the esports at the community college, and that kind of got us talking into computers, programming, games, stuff like that. And he's not a programmer, but he would some of the new news with like Apple. If you saw like the Surface Pro, Microsoft releases the Surface Pro, and it has like 2 ports now. And Apple releases its new MacBook, and it's got like all the ports.
Wait, when you say 2 ports, which 2 ports does it have?
I think Surface has 2 Thunderbolt ports. Oh, I think it's 2 Thunderbolt and like the weird Surface-y magnet, like the proprietary Microsoft port.
But now
Apple comes
power thing.
Yeah, Apple comes out with their new their MacBook, and it's got like full HDMI, a headphone jack, everything. So the roles have completely reversed. But we're talking about tech stuff, and he's like, yeah, because that's what you do, right? You're a programmer. Because we were talking about some things. Specific. I think we were even talking about my second oldest daughter, who's been doing some Scratch-like programming. And I said, yeah. And then we actually got into a conversation. And most of the time, Mark, I don't know for you, but for me, when you're like, yeah, I'm a developer, and if you even try to start talking about like what you do or how you program or anything about that, people are just immediately, oh, it's computers. Yeah, I don't really understand that stuff.
I like to call myself a hacker, Tim.
Because
everybody knows what a hacker is, right?
Oh yeah, sure. Everybody knows what a hacker is, especially that professor at Penn State that was all on board with our hackathon the first time.
Oh, that's right. I forgot about that. Yeah, where he was like, "You're going to hack? You're going to break into systems?
I can't have my students doing this. Are you kidding me? This is not something that should be encouraged." But no, we actually got to talk about programming and a little bit of the kind of like the. Boiling it down, there's basically 2 operating systems, right? There's a Windows kernel and there's the Linux kernel because FreeBSD and then Mac OS is all based on that. There's some other ones, but when you're talking about mainstream, what consumers are using, it's pretty much 2 kernels. and how programs written for different operating systems, how that works, and even the difference in the fact that programs have to be able to be compiled for different chip architectures, right? Because you've got Intel and AMD, and just the fact that you can run software on 2 different microprocessors that have maybe some shared instruction sets, but different instruction sets is pretty interesting. And I got to explain a little bit about how there's compiled languages and there's higher level languages, interpreted languages. The stuff I program in is generally interpreted languages, even up to the point of saying, like what my daughter's been playing with it, which is it's like a Scratch base. So if you've seen you drag and drop things, the Scratch based programming. But Microsoft has something that it's called Make Code, and they have a Make Code arcade, and it's Scratch, but it's tuned for making games.
Oh, great!
So you can basically say, see the sprite, associate it with the controls.
What's it called again?
It's called Make Code, and there's Make Code. They have a couple different variants. There's even a Lego Make Code. In this, it's Scratch then applied to the Mindstorm, the Mindstorm hardware. So you can program the Mindstorm hardware using that same interface that kids are used to. She's done Scratch before. So, but it's really simplistic because you can say, take this sprite, which is you, right? You're the player, and attach it to the controls. And now when you move the controls, the player's moving. And it's tuned for games. So in that way, it's a higher level language, right? That is tuned for the domain that you're working with, which is games. And it has that same properties of I write primarily in PHP, which is a higher level interpreted language, which runs on something that is written in C or C++. I forget what the source is now. And then that actually runs on an operating system, and that's what communicates with with the processor and does the stuff. But mine's a higher order language. Same thing with what my daughter's doing. It's a very higher order language that is for a very specific purpose to build these games. So it was one of those rare things where, as a programmer, I could actually explain a little bit of what we do, and people weren't just like, "Oh, that computery stuff. No, I can't follow that. I can't understand it." But
that's a lot better than making your daughter suffer through PHP. I wouldn't want to have any.
Are you kidding? Oh, is this what this is going to become?
Kid
is this what
have
this
to
is
go
become?
through and be tortured. No, it's just scripting language, even Java, anything. I think the tool set that's available to kids now is really, really exciting. I think
amazing, and
which it opens up a door, especially if you get the kid at the right age, where they're not jaded yet, right? They're not, you didn't force them. That's why I made a joke about PHP. You didn't force them to have to look at code and just try to understand. It's like looking at a foreign language and not knowing how to read it. And then you just get turned off by saying, "Oh, it's just too hard to learn. It's too frustrating. I don't want to deal with it." But the interactive applications they have now to learn the programming concepts, especially for kids, is great.
Well, and so she just the other day, I had somebody over. I was helping them figure out how to do stuff with spreadsheets, which is programming of its own kind, right? If you want to talk about a higher order, higher level language, spreadsheets are kind of.
Hey, most startups should just be a spreadsheet, right?
Something like that, yeah. But I was showing how to do some things,
which I think is actually a good. Sorry to interrupt you, but this is something I think about all the time, and actually it's helped me to kind of.
How can this application
not let my mind run wild on project ideas that I'll never work on? So I ask myself, can this be solved with Google Sheets?
And that's kind of where I want to get.
If it can, then I should even be working on it. I should just open up a Google Sheet, put some data in there, and then you're good to go.
I like that because I want to kind of get to that concept here, right? So she saw me and this friend, kind of helping them figure out how to do some stuff in a spreadsheet, and she just went to Khan Academy and started doing their JavaScript courses.
Oh, great. Okay, so it opened up that door to kind of get her interested.
Yeah, she's in. Now she's reading some code. She's doing some JavaScript, drawing on it. Stuff that was similar to what we talked about last week, right? Like some of the first code is make a line bounce around on a screen, right? And then now Make Code too. Once you get into it, it has the Scratch-like interface, but it also has a JavaScript and a Python. So they have variants where you can code and make code the arcade, make the games with whatever libraries are tuned for making games, but you can do it in JavaScript and you can do it in Python, which I think I'm hoping is the next step for her, right? Is to go from doing this drag and drop block stuff to going over to writing some code and actually then, because the truth is that's a lot easier to debug than block, visual programming, when you can just, move commands around in an IDE-like environment as opposed to dragging blocks in and out. But that's where I hope it goes. And what's really cool, what I'm excited, I haven't told her this yet, so hopefully she's not listening. But you can compile it and run it on some hardware. So Adafruit has these little handheld $35 games. I think they're based on the new Raspberry Pi microcontroller that you can go from Make Arcade, and you can just throw it right onto that, and it's the same UI that you see on the screen. So
is it just transferred by USB? Do you just plug in the device or USB and it just detects it?
Yeah, because I think it's
hit the little button to run it on it and just compiles it and sends it over?
I think when it compiles down, it's using CircuitPython, which CircuitPython lets you just basically drop Python code onto what appears to be your computer, a flash drive. And then the microcontroller executes the Python code. So you don't have to have like an IDE and flash like you would in a normal Arduino microcontroller type of setup where you're plugging in and saying flash, push this into the memory. It's a file system, and you can just drag your Python code in there. So for getting started doing embedded stuff and like hardware, firmware, whatever you want to call it, like that type of programming, it's really easy. So Adafruit has this little handheld game, and I'm just going to be able to take her game and put it on there, and she can play it like it's an actual game. So I'm really excited to, once she gets a little further, just let her do that. But
well, that was something that like Andrew, when we were doing back in the Levi Tech days, when we did a couple of those events. Let's say we did the not Discover Lehigh Valley, the Da Vinci Center. We did a couple of events with the Da Vinci Center.
Where they had those different stuff.
Yeah, and they had some like simple kind of electronics, Arduino based, or maybe just some LED kind of simple things. Just do a little bit of soldering, just to kind of connect the wires together to see something connect. And then also the benefit of the Arduino platform to have like a code interface that could easily interface with some hardware, kind of bridges and makes that connection real, right? So a kid can actually see the code that they're writing on the computer and actually see it work something on a physical device.
Right, because you're saying blink this light, which is a whole lot better than saying echo this to a screen. At least for getting people into, I'm telling a machine what to do. It's one thing just to see your text pop out on a screen, which the truth is for most of us who are web programmers, that's really all we're doing. Did your parents ever concatenating large amounts of strings and sending them back to a browser?
Did your parents ever buy you like one of those electronic kits?
Oh, like the Radio Shack ones?
Kind of the breadboard style boards. You could kind of plug in like little lights or circuits or little transistors.
Not the breadboard style, but like the one I had was there are little springs on it, and you pull the spring back and stick the wire underneath it. And that's how you would wire it all up. They're all components that were in it. It was like I think 100, I don't know what it was called, like 101 electronic kit from Radio Shack.
Yep.
And now for the kids, we got the snap circuits, which is pretty much the same thing, where they're little snaps that you have on a jacket, right?
See,
and that you snap them together with components.
When I did it as a kid, it led me down a dark path to go around my house and see any bit of electronics I could take apart.
Oh,
I remember
nice.
taking apart any, like if it was an old tape player, definitely like an old TV, but you had to be careful about it. But the cathode or the tube-based TVs the capacitors back in the past, and it's just anything I could go around, I could salvage just to kind of see how it was worked. Now I would attempt to put it back together and fail almost all the time, but it was a great experience just to open up the hardware, just see the wires, the boards, and that was kind of an interesting. Like I said, it kind of led me down a dark path where I probably took apart some things I should have taken apart, but just because of they're broken, then I can't use them anymore. My parents can't use them anymore, but that was a fun experience.
You were fixing it, even though it wasn't broken. You were fixing it, and you couldn't fix it all. You couldn't fix it all the way.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, as a kid, that's what I had. I mean, for anything, the only past high school, the only study I did was in electronics. So I have a little bit of that background. But
getting back to you piqued my interest about your friend who you seem to have this really long technical conversation with at church.
A really long technical.
You covered a lot of material. It sounded like.
We were just explaining how computers work because
I'm curious.
He runs games on a Windows system, and he runs he has a Mac for school, and just the difference in his perspective on what he likes about one over the other. Games don't run on Mac. We were talking a little bit about. Did you see this new Steam handheld controller?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that looks really exciting. Kind of like it's what the Switch is great. I have a Switch for my kids, and we play it. Kids love it. It's great too, but this looks like a Switch for big kids. In a sense, because it is a computer,
everything, right?
It's a computer, and you could pretty much install anything on it. It's a Linux-based device. It has a really good screen. It's really powerful, good graphics chip in it. So I'm super tempted by that.
And so with that though, Steam is trying to get all of their, as much as they can, the games to play on their new device, right? But their new device is it runs SteamOS. It's not like it runs Windows. So now Steam's faced with an interesting choice, right? You either have to figure out how to port games easily from Windows to Linux and from Mac to Linux so you can play it on SteamOS, or you have to make Windows games playable on Linux. And that's the path they took. They are now contributing, I don't know if it's to Wine or it's to the successor of Wine, but they are making a lot of contributions to that, which I find very interesting, because that means maybe I could run some of the non-game Windows software that I like to run on my normal desktop. Like, I would love to run Fusion 360 on my Linux machine. It's far more powerful than my Windows machine, for sure. So.
Yeah, and I don't know. I listened to a podcast that talked about this, and I'm not sure about the system that they use, like the subsystem on top of Linux that they use. It's similar to Wine, but it's like their own.
It's not Wine though. Yeah.
Yeah, I forget what it's called. I'm trying to look it up, but I cannot remember. Is it Proton? Protons? Is that what it is? I don't know.
Sounds familiar.
But
still
from what I've heard,
right?
from developer podcasts I've been listening to, where like that platform's gotten really good. Where for, let's say, if you wanted to port a Windows game over to the SteamOS, it's a lot better than it used to be. The transition to do that. So, which is something that I've no experience with. It's something that's interesting. I also like the idea of the Steam Deck be able to, as it integrates with game engines, like you have Unreal or Godot is a great open source game engine, that it could possibly provide like an easy integration. So if you're like building your game like a Unity, Unreal, or Godot, and just hit a button to compile, sends it over to the Steam Deck and run it. I'm hoping I'm sure Epic and Unreal will do that at some point to make that way an easy kind of test platform. But because that'll be really exciting. I mean, just make it more accessible.
Yeah, and that'd be that's one of the things, as developers, there's always like, I would like to also be able to do this, or I like to play with this, or I want to learn this language or the other thing, and maybe we get to it, maybe we don't. But that's one thing that I've always wanted to play with, either Unreal or Unity, and just see what those platforms are like in building games. And I've never been able to.
But then, will it even be available? Like the Steam Deck. Like, when is it going to be released? Because with the chip shortage, everything that's going on.
That's the other thing too.
I'm still waiting to get a new PS5 and an Xbox, but I can't do it because of it's non-stock. I'm not paying the crazy prices that the scalpers are charging online for them.
And I saw too.
It's crazy with the chip shortage. Like, and luckily, I upgraded my video card last year by buying a new computer.
I was like, how do you upgrade your video? Like, can you find it? That's the one thing. I built a brand new desktop this year.
Yeah, so I wanted to get a 3080, probably not right when it came out, probably about 6 months after it came out. And the only way to really get it at a reasonable price was honestly just to buy a new computer. So that's why I had it in it. Yeah, and it's great. But yeah, to buy it aftermarket, you have to pay crazy prices, and they're just not available right now. It's just
Yeah, no, this chip shortage. A couple of things that impacted with that. On the game side, have you seen I think it's PocketOS from, I think it's Analog. I'm not too familiar with the company. Yeah. But it's going to be a cartridge, not an emulator. It's not an emulator. It's hardware that you put an old Game Boy cartridge in, and it runs. But it runs off the cartridge, not off a ROM.
So is it just Game Boy compatible? Like, it's a
Game Boy Color, a bunch of it, and I think there's some conversions so you can take some of the other portable games. But the thing is, you need the cartridge, and it. I mean, it is in some way, it has to be an emulator. It's emulating hardware that used to exist, but it's not loading it from a ROM. It's loading it, as far as I understand, from a cartridge. But at the same time, they were supposed to release, I think, this year. They're pushed to next year because of the chip shortage. Raspberry Pi had to increase they say temporarily increase the price of their lowest kind of entry, that the minimum entry point for a Raspberry Pi has always historically been $35. They've had to bump it up to $45. They had discontinued their 1 gigabyte model and made the 2 gigabyte model the 35. They've had to bump that up to 45, and now they're selling the 1 gig as a 35, kind of restart, putting it back into manufacturing, so they can still have that price point. But that's what they attribute it to. Is
still for what that is. That's pretty cool technology for only being $35 or under $50. That's crazy.
Yeah, no, but what they're I mean, Raspberry Pi at this point is far more than you and me playing around with stuff. It's other hardware that is based on the Raspberry Pi module or the compute module, or they're building hardware attached things for Raspberry Pi, and it's part of this package where it's like my DIY kit costs this much. Well, that just changed by $10, which in a DIY kit that may be impactful.
It's true, yeah.
So now they're at least giving the manufacturer choice. You could go with the older 1 gig model for $10 less, or figure out how you're going to charge $10 more, or eat the cost for $10 more. But yeah, the chip shortage is everywhere. It's delaying everything. So who knows when we'll see Valve's new handheld? But that would be a great, to be able to write a game and just push it right to the handheld and get that experience for people, especially people that are just starting. You're getting started. Playing games. It's a lot nicer. I mean, yeah. You can play games on a computer. That's how I grew up playing games on a computer. But there's something about console games or handheld games it's just a different feel. And to be able to write something for that type of a system and see it come there immediately. Like as soon as the Switch came out, I was like, how do I write software for the Switch? I don't know. Somehow promised Nintendo that you're going to make a lot of money and they'll give you a dev SDK. But they ain't giving it to me. They're not just someone who wants to play around with it. I don't even want the special SDK. I just want to be like, can I write a program and somehow sideload it on that and see how nope, I don't think so. Maybe
the platforms have gotten better to do testing and integration, but yeah, you still need, for those closed ecosystems, you still need permission.
So Steam's new hardware is going to be great for that, because hopefully you'll be able to. But all right, so now we're all coming down. This all comes together, right? So I had a great conversation with somebody about the stuff that we do. Actually, where we got to on that was him understanding, trying to install Wine to play games on Mac and it not working, and me saying, oh, well, hopefully that'll get better for you, because Steam's making that better for everybody. If they're making that better for everybody, they're probably making it better for Mac anyway, since Mac is just a variant of Linux. And
he was installed. I never did that. I've done the Wine before on Linux before, but that was a horrible experience I never want to go back to. But on the Mac though, he's doing Wine on the Mac. He tried.
It didn't work. It didn't work out well at all. So he didn't do it. But it was like, and that's why you could at least try it.
Do you know what game he was trying to get? What game he's trying to get played?
I have no idea. We didn't get that far.
I'm just curious.
It was more of like how it all works together and why you can run Wine, which is built on a Mac, and that's where he got.
So he was just going to just his personal interest of like, okay, I have a Mac, I want to play some games on it.
Yeah,
I don't know how to, so he did some Googling to find some articles on how to do that, and then that's how he got started with it, huh?
Yep.
But he's really not a tech guy himself. He's not a programmer.
No. He's a English teacher. So. So this all comes down to, that was an interesting experience for me, because as a developer, most non-technical people, as soon as you start kind of talking a little bit about your craft, are like, I don't understand it. Or
I still don't understand, Tim.
You still don't understand it. Or the flip side, and I know you get this, Mark, is, oh, you're a developer? I have this idea.
Oh my gosh. You reminded me how I got triggered this week. Yes, we talk about that. On Twitter. On Twitter, I got triggered a little bit. Yes, we can definitely talk about. Continue what you're going to say, and I'm going to look up this tweet.
So there's that. There's always it seems like the answer is one or the other. You're not technical, so it's like don't bore me with those technical details. I can't understand it anyway. And you're just, I just want to express to you the thing that I do every day. Or the flip side, and I think for developers that are watching this podcast or listening to this podcast, I hope that resonates with you. That it's sometimes frustrating because it's not like you're going to tell them, let me tell you about a dependency injection container. You're just like, this is what I kind of work on. And then people are like, I don't know, computers. Yeah, I don't understand it. But the flip side then, and the other response is, I've got this idea. You want to build it for me? I'll give you some of the profit. And the truth is, I know it's so frustrating, right? So I'm
having flashbacks. I'm like having like
I'm triggering Mark from so badly right now.
The Lehigh Tech startup days. Oh my gosh, so many conversations.
But the truth is, I'm pretty sure any developer who's been doing it for a while has a list someplace, whether it's actually written down, whether it's in their mind, of the things they have wanted to build. And we just don't get to it. But it's like, and that's what you were saying earlier, right? A lot of things you're like, I could build this thing. And then does it boil down to, you could solve this with Google Sheets? and maybe you should solve it with Google Sheets. But we get these ideas of things
or somebody else has solved it, which you can just download the app and just, even though if you're somebody who's creative and you have the urge to create something, your mind will always go there and you say, oh, that'd be kind of fun to work on that. I'd love to kind of use this app that I built on my own phone. But then you have to think about, okay, once you've been doing this for a while, you know how long things take to make and to kind of how laborious the process can become. So then as somebody
else made it,
as you get to be older, you kind of think, okay, do I really want to spend the next 3 to 6 months just putting together, maybe, I don't know, or even just like a month of your time, 2 weeks to a month, just to get a simple prototype up. Maybe as an experiment, trying to learn something. That's usually what I kind of focus on a project. That's why
your goal is learning it.
Tim, that's why we're doing this podcast, because I want to play with some new podcast 2.0 and technologies and do some projects to be kind of fun with it. But for me, I need a project to be motivated to do something like this. But going back, you bring up a good point. I got triggered this week on Twitter, and I probably shouldn't have. And I held back a little bit, but it was Twitter's pretty much the primary social media. Even though I don't have any apps installed on my phone, I still look at Twitter probably about once a day, primarily through the Brave browser. We talked about that, keeping my privacy.
Were you keeping your privacy and making your Bitcoins?
Yes, that's true. We could talk about that on a future show or future segment.
Okay.
But I like how Twitter, like, they have their interests or topics that you can follow. So I pick, like, there's web developer topics, like gaming topics. I have like probably about 5 or 6 topics.
I don't think I've ever done that.
And I because I actually don't follow that many people on Twitter. And the only people I follow, this is a good rule. If you're ever interested in me following you, you have to follow me first. So I only follow people who follow me.
You're one of them.
Yes, because honestly, it keeps the feed to a minimum, right? So I don't see that many posts
that don't follow you. Like you follow.
I use Twitter lists, so I do like their list feature, which I have probably about. I have about 20 different lists of different topics of and there could be like anywhere between 50 to, I have some that are like 200 or 150 people on that list. So when I have some time where I say, okay, I want to look at my Unreal developers list, I'll just go through the list. And I can see like the posts that they made that day.
But you don't follow any of them?
No, I don't. No.
Okay.
Unless they follow me, or I follow
you.
Wow. Or I may follow them, and maybe because of a conversation, maybe we go do a little back and forth on the Twitters, and then we may follow. But if he does follow me back, I don't know. We'll see. But
so there's the secret, huh?
Because if
you want Mark to listen to your podcast, he has to be on it.
True.
If you want him to follow you on Twitter, you have to follow him first.
Because one of these. And what you'll get when you follow these topics that Twitter has, it's kind of interesting because it'll just get some random tweets. And I know that they're more weighted tweets, which like either they've been retweeted or favorited, so they have a kind of a higher importance in their system or their ranking. So then they get showed up on other timelines of who people are following them, and then it just adds to the retweets or the favors. So this one guy posted, says, as a solo developer building a scrappy startup, ... Should I use Git?
This is what you're talking about. All right. Yeah.
And I was like, all right. Or is it okay? First of all, I was like, okay, that kind of like that almost those 2 lines for me as a developer, because he called himself a solo developer. So if you're calling yourself a solo developer and you built maybe some prototypes or tests, I'm sure you were introduced at source control at some point. I don't know. Even if you don't use Git or use something else.
One would hope.
You'd hope.
He knows it. He knows enough to. He's saying, should I use it?
True. Should I use it? Okay. And this has it has like 400 favorites and 30 retweets and about 200 comments on it. I immediately said, okay, I'm not gonna get into this too much. But then he then did another post following up to that, said, okay, here's the context for what I just posted. I've used version control for every project I've ever worked on, but recently I've realized I barely use it for anything. It's my code only. All my code is backed up on Google Drive. I don't use branches or PR or pull requests. I always forget to commit. It's more of a nuisance. So that was a follow-up tweet that he made to his initial tweet. This is where I got triggered. I was like, what are you doing? So then I said, okay, so if you need to ask this question, then you probably shouldn't be building a scrappy startup unless it's Twitter dev bait, and then I applaud you. Because you know what I mean? Okay. Like going back to,
it's clickbait,
he's calling himself a sole developer, but is he really? Or is he really just trying to do a technical post or technical tweet to get some comments from other developers to possibly start a conversation to eventually ask them to build whatever he's thinking about? which that's happened to me before. That's happened to me multiple times. Like I'll start a conversation with somebody on Twitter.
Well, they find I'm building this thing, and you're like, you're building it wrong. Like, can you build it right with me?
No, they'll find that we'll talk about some technical issue just back and just comment on each other's. And then they'll find I'm a developer, and they're like, or I had done development, and then he's like, "Oh, you're a developer. Oh, would you be interested in working on this one?" It's happened many, many times. So I get a little burned out by it. Then, so I don't know. And then I looked at his. Then I kind of dug a little deeper, and I go to his profile. It says, "I help software developers get a 4-day work week." So that's his profile on his Twitter profile. And I was like,
you know how you can get a 4-day work week. Like I've done basically nothing today because I did it all in the other 4 days. That's how you get a 4-day work week.
Yeah. But then he used to be a data scientist for Microsoft. So that's one plus.
Okay.
But his pin tweet is, I paid someone $100 to write a blog post 3 months later, and now gets 50 clicks on Google Pay per day. So every day, probably many more months. So it's a business guy.
Mark feels very triggered right now. This is interesting.
Going back to what you said about business people or just that have ideas and they want people to build it for them. Let's make this a little bit more reasonable and kind of get me off the ledge, and so I don't feel like I'm just going to want to do something bad right now. How much do you think a business person needs to know, or how much effort do you think they should get into building a prototype, or how far should they take it before actually trying to get a developer to help them with their project?
Well, so I want to revisit a couple things.
I have to calm down here. So I got really agitated there. So I'm going to let you talk now. So
I need to revisit a couple things first. One was the whole, we see something and there's already an app out there, but but I can build it myself. Mm-hmm. And to me, to communicate kind of the ridiculousness of that, it's like, can I take a piece of wood and out of it fashion a handle, and then get a bunch of metal and an anvil and heat it up in a furnace and shape out a hammer? Yes. Do they also have them at the hardware store? Yes. Just because I can build it doesn't mean it's worth me building it because somebody else, but as developers, sometimes we get trapped in that, this has to be like the classic trap, right? I'm going to build my own ORM.
Okay.
Right. Because I don't like how this ORM works. I don't like how this ORM works. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to build my own. I just saw recently, there was a Medium post about someone who's like, why I gave up on PHP or why I regret using I forget what it was. It was something like that. And it starts with, well, I looked at a couple of ORMs and none of them were fast enough. So I just decided to build my own. And here's why I don't like PHP, because of all the problems I ran into building my own ORM. It's like, I think if you thought the existing ORMs weren't fast enough, you're probably doing something wrong. There's another optimization you're missing, or you think it needs to be faster than it really does. But yes, the classic trap for developers, I'm going to build this thing that is highly complex because I have a simplistic view of how it works.
Yeah, especially after you go through one project and you get burned out a little bit by the framework. That always happens. You feel like, okay, or burned out by the project itself. Where it's like, oh, that was very laborious for me to learn. That took so much time. I might take 3 months on that project, but really the first 2 months would be learning the framework. And then you come out of that thinking like, oh, I could do that so much better. But if you're going to be doing something like that, if you're going to, I never had a thought of building an ORM. I did want to build my own MVC, router. I've done that before.
That's
because if I want something super lightweight, but also I did it as a process just to learn it. To learn kind of how that works. So if you are the type where you need, like me, I need a project to actually learn something. I can't just, I can read about something, but honestly, if I read it, if I don't apply it, then I'm not going to learn it.
Yeah. And that's building your own ORM layer, MVC layer, micro framework, whatever it is for the purpose of learning. Applaud it. Yeah. That's a great thing. But as developers, sometimes we tend to get in this mindset of, oh, I see all the problems with these other things. I know I can fix those. And we miss the fact that just the thing that they already solve is really complex, and we're going to have a hard time solving that. But back to your trigger.
Get back to practical
triggering tweet. I want to revisit the version control thing for a second too, because we kind of glossed over the idea that I never use version. I forget to commit. It's all my own files. I'm the only thing. That to me sounds like a guy with a screwdriver saying, "Why do I need this screwdriver?" as he tries to use it to hammer in a nail. The issue isn't that version control isn't useful to you. Dude, it's you're using it wrong. If you're forgetting to commit, what are you using the version? The whole point of version control is for me to make small incremental changes. So when I go, I just introduced a bug. Where did I introduce it? Let me find that change set. Let me figure out how to fix it. The whole point of version control isn't backing stuff up because it's already backed up on my Google Drive, right? It's not about having a backup. It's about having a history of the evolution of your code. So when things go wrong, you can figure out why.
I wonder. Well, when I was first introduced to version control was with CVS and also Microsoft Visual Source Safe. I believe that was the name a long time ago.
Because you went from CVS to SVN to then.
Well, I know. Well, I think Visual Source Safe is its own proprietary Microsoft version control system. That, like I said, it's been so long since I've touched. I'm not sure what they're doing now. But yeah, I was first introduced to, just because my own I think when I was at the tax administrator I was working for, when I was wanting to work, and and they didn't have a way to back up their code. Like, and that was surprising to me, thinking back at it now, that I worked for a company that had their own developer department, and the only way they backed up their code was on different servers. You know, they may have did backups of the servers, and if that actually happened many times, where they lost some code and they had to retrieve a backup from like a previous from previous version of the server.
But that's still bad because you don't. I mean, who cares about the? I mean, yes, obviously you want the current version of the code, but what about last week?
Yeah. So once I started doing had more control over my own projects, then I started, okay, what type of this is very, very bizarre. This way I had to rely on a server administrator to get a previous version of my code back, and took forever, and it wasn't. So I got into CVS, which that's kind of, the open source kind of source control, very, very old, where you kind of pre SVN, and it did a good job of just backing up when there was conflicts. There was many times that I lost some code in that too, or the database just kind of broke. So I wouldn't recommend anybody to use it now, because like you're saying, SVN or Git, once I switched to Git, I never went back. I don't think I'll ever. No, I don't know if will ever use a different source control system other than that, because I've just. There's things that are
related to Git, but going back like the old SVM or CVS model it was just so painful to do merges.
Yeah, or even like the Git desktop client, which is really, really good from a user interface standpoint. I have it installed. I occasionally open up.
GitHub desktop client.
Yeah, I'm sorry, the GitHub. That's right, the GitHub desktop client, because I use just GitHub. So I like the interface, but once you get in kind of the patterns of using the command line and using a version control system that runs really, really well on the command line, it's really, really nice, super fast. So I would probably never go back to go to anything else. Yeah,
but that's the point. Like, even if it's your own personal project, it's like, why don't you want to see the points? It's like save points in a game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. I went down the wrong path. Okay. How do you undo it? Well, you don't if even if you're using version control and you're never committing, you don't undo it.
And or even if then take the next step too. Let's say you do a prototype and you do use version control. Well, then once you want to bring in another developer to work with you, then you guys have a platform now to share code and be able to edit code together. Do you ever remember have you ever had the experience back in the day of trying to work with another web developer and editing the same files and be able and not overwrite each other without version control?
I feel like yes. I feel like, it's been a long time ago. But yeah, there's always the whole, like, we're FTPing to the server. Oh no, I overwrote your change. But it's been years since that, because that's not how you do software development now.
Because there's a file locking. Because I remember that when I worked off of in the company of we would be working basically off the exact same server from a terminal.
Okay.
From a terminal, and what we would do.
Been in that situation.
So there was rules and process of what we would do to follow to making sure we were not stepping on each other's toes. Because we could edit the same. Well, actually, no. The system allows to lock the file down, so we wouldn't be able to access that because somebody else was editing it. But what we would do is we would make copies of the files that we'd be working on, and then have to manually merge them together, just by looking at the lines of code and be able to do that.
Right, exactly what version control does for you.
Yeah, so it was just a manual process.
Yeah. Now the flips, like what I do now though, if JetBrains, for in my opinion, best IDEs. I love the stuff that they're doing, and they have a plugin for I think pretty much any of their IDE called Code With Me, where you can send a link and somebody else's computer it'll use their installation of JetBrains, or it'll launch a kind of installable client if they don't even have the JetBrains IDE there, where they can see the code that you're working on, and they can work on it too. So you have the idea of pair programming where I can share exactly what I'm working on with you, and you can change the files. Now, sure, you got to understand what you're doing there, that you are allowing someone else to change files on your computer. And there's even, you can select, do you want just view only? Do you want them only to be able to have access to files that you're working on? Or do you want to actually give them access to the entire project that you're working on? And when it's coworkers inside the same team as, the code that I'm working on, then yeah, there's not as much of concern there. And we've used it where I work for a couple, more than once. It's something that we use every once in a while. And it's really nice. In fact, there was one time when we were doing what would be considered swarm coding, where there were a bunch of us all in the same file talking about how we were going to make this work. And I was adding lines of code in a method saying, all right, I need this and this and this, so we need to inject those in the constructor. And someone else was able just to scroll up and start adding them to the constructor, because it doesn't force you to follow the other people. So we're all like working, it's like what you're describing. We're all working on the same code base at the same time though. And it's like collaboratively editing a Google Doc, only it's your IDE. And it was quite quite an interesting experience. And from a how well does pair programming work concept, and this was multiple, this is more, I think it was 3 or 4 people, all making changes in different places because we're saying, oh, this is how we're going to change it. So I know what change I need to make here, you know what change you need to make there, so this all works together, and everybody able to kind of edit at the same time, and we run the tests and they all work, and it was quite an interesting experience.
Hey, so I'm for any IDE as long as it has a VIM mode.
It does. I mean, all the JetBrains IDEs you can install.
Did you ever walk down? Are you on the Team Emacs or Team Vim? You ever go down that?
No, I'm on Team using IDE. Give me a break.
I am stuck on. Well, that's the thing. If I use any IDE, like I use Visual Studio Code, I use Android Studio. I use.
If you use Android Studio, you're using a JetBrains product.
True.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking about the different IDEs or Visual Studio or just Visual Studio. We use that too. But I always turn on the VIM mode with that. Interesting. One job I had, I worked with a Turkish programmer. The 2 things he loved most about programming was Vim and Perl. The Vim stuck with me. He taught me how to use Vim. And it's once you kind of get into that pattern and your brain starts to wire around the your visual mode, your edit mode, or your insert mode, and be able to kind of move around, do replacements real quickly, just kind of navigate just using keyboard, not touching the mouse at all. It becomes a dependency. Your mind starts to depend on. And if I go away from that for a while, I can do that. But what I'll find though is like I feel like I'm just not. It doesn't feel right. And then once I turn the mode back on. And what I find is once I turn the mode back on, it actually slows down the IDE, which is kind of a pain. Like in Visual Studio Code, I was actually in that for, what was I doing? I can't remember.
Does it really?
A couple of weeks ago. It just felt like, well, okay, when you're typing the code and you feel like it's just not, like when you press the keys on the keyboard, it's not registering on the display as fast as it could be. I know also with the IntelliSense or some of the work that the IDE is doing is trying to analyze your code while you're typing it. That could also cause some delays here and there. Yeah. But sometimes with these VIM modes, if they're not clean a program, as well as it can be, they can sometimes act a little bit slow. So, and I just go back to going back on the command line and or just using up the default GUI Vim application. But anyway, it was like kind of going back to, once you kind of learn even just an ID. I know a lot of developers, it was not Vim or Emacs or just an ID, they feel comfortable with. It's a tool that, if you use it for a very long time, it just feels like a, comfortable, warm blanket that you go home to at night, and it makes you feel all nice and cozy.
So that's I may not have the same feelings as you do, but I do know there are those on our team who know Vim, and they can get around Vim in, ways that I would never be able to do. And there's a developer on our team who uses Vim and the Vim bindings in PHP Storm.
Yeah.
Because he knows them so well, but he's still using PHP Storm because there's a whole lot more benefit to an IDE.
Yeah, it's just interesting. Like when I use an IDE with somebody, or like when I'm teaching somebody too, like I won't even go there with them. But if I'm using, let's say, Dreamweaver for my design students, because from a visual editing standpoint, Dreamweaver is easier for them to kind of see the HTML and the CSS, and it helps them write that. Yeah. But I could never use it myself. Like if I would force my day-to-day work or my own personal projects, I would have to just basically just use a text editor, because I know how to operate that. It's much more of a better, faster experience for me.
Have you ever used WebStorm? I mean,
I'd use that back in the day. It felt slow to me back in the day. I didn't use it for that much.
They've done great work.
Because it's written in Java, right?
That's the thing though. All of JetBrains IDEs are in Java, but from using things like Zen Studio or Eclipse, which were written in Java and were slow.
Eclipse, yeah, that's it. Yeah,
right. Yeah. It's surprising how fast they run. I don't have. I mean, on my dev system, I don't have a problem with Storm running. I mean, I've got a pretty beefy dev system, all but the video card, since video cards don't exist right now. But everything else on my dev system is pretty fast. So, but back to the question.
Which question?
The question that triggered you.
I got to bring you back to it. I finally walked myself off the ledge. I got really emotional there for a little bit. Now you're going to bring me back to it?
The people that have asked you as a developer to build something for them. Yeah. What are the things that you've said, man, one day I want to build this? Like I've got a list of things that I would love, like projects, either side projects, and I just don't have the time to do them. But I've got a list, and some of them have been pitches that we've kind of mock pitched at Lehigh Valley Tech, either startup weekends or something like that, and that I've seen on Kickstarter later. There's been ideas that's like, oh yeah, there's that idea. Somebody else finally built it. Whether it's a hardware project or a hardware software project or just software. So what are some of the things that you've wanted to build?
My dream project that I'm kind of slowly chipping away at is I want to make an AI that will design. So basically you could take a set of text files of, text copy that, a marketing person would write, maybe a series of images, be able to do analysis of that and to a little bit of learning to be able to apply that to a design for somebody. Because I do think that's going to happen eventually.
Like a website style design?
Yeah, like a website or just a layout for an interface, if for some type of visual interface that somebody has to just process that information in an easy way, either online or on a device. But primarily what I'm thinking about from a web perspective, because I do think we're slowly getting there with, the systems like that. I do talk to my students about how the fact of they're trying to put web designers out of business, like the Squarespace, the Wix, the Weebly.
Those are very focused templates.
They start with the template, but the tools have gotten around the templates have gotten really, really good. If you just have a good marketing eye, you could start with a template, you could change a few things as long as you're good about adding, know what content to add to the site. You don't really need a designer. I recommend that to many people who, let's say, you're a photographer or if you're a video editor. There's no reason you should be spending any money on paying somebody to build a website for you. You should be
you're selling like little stuff at your farmer's market or something like that, and you got product photos. Yeah, go to Squarespace.
The tools have gotten so good, and the templates have gotten a lot cleaner.
When did Squarespace start sponsoring this, man? There's
maybe someday.
Yeah, maybe get Barley, man. Get Barley.
All right. But thinking about also the no-code movement, which is something I've been following too. Have you seen Webflow?
The no-code. I mean, there's serverless, man. I've been working on servers all my life, and now they're telling me they're going away. But what's the no-code? So
if you go to if webflow.com is a good example of this, it's an online website, web page editor it's all visual. One thing you can start with a template, and then it's just a visual too. Basically, a drag and drop visual editor that then converts that to HTML and CSS, which you could export that out and take it someplace else. But
no code isn't talking about no programming. It's talking about
which you don't really. It's made for people to not have any requirements for HTML and CSS. Right?
Okay,
it's made for designers. Markup. Yeah, it's made for designers who good visual hierarchy, typography, color theory. They just who have an eye for it and they can be able to know what they want to create and it's a good tool set around that.
And it feels like, that's the jump that we kind of missed for years. That should have been, honestly, from Dreamweaver and Front Page and things like that.
Yeah.
To now.
So, which I think that's where it's going to. That's why I brought it. Talk about AI or artificial intelligence or machine learning. Where eventually,
what you're talking about now is all template driven. It's all
correct.
you pick the template, you change the colors, but are you saying your AI is going to look at this copy and kind of from that try to get the emotional feel and then understand how to visually represent that?
Also using machine learning on existing designs that already exist. Because if you do analysis of that, I've kind of thought about the process, like what if I could you could have an algorithm that go through, basically take screenshots of all these websites to analyze what the text and images. You could analyze it also for positive and negative space, or basically the white space around the content, and then be able to understand layouts with that. So you could do a lot of machine learning to understand how pages are laid out, just to kind of see what existing pages are laid out, and then take that to somebody
you can parse it and you can understand the link structure too.
Yeah,
because you can get the information architecture from a page, and then also how that relates to its visual appearance.
Yeah,
which from a machine learning standpoint would be great.
So that's my idea. So let's say go to sitebuild.io, sign up there. Well, actually, you can go to it. It's just you'll just see sitebuild.io.
What is it? Site built?
Site build.
Site build.
Yes. So
sitebuild.io. Okay.
Sitebuild.io.
And then I sign up there for the free account.
Well, eventually you'll be able to sign up. Right now, you just see the name sitebuild.io on the page. But it's actually a real application that I'm actually building. I'm starting out first with the no code type of architecture, type of pattern. So we're saying, okay, there's a great open source online editor called Grape.js. You might want to take a look at that, which is basically a visual editor for HTML and CSS that then outputs out HTML and CSS you could store like in a database or NoSQL
You're like
store.
literally just dragging like this.
Drag and drop.
Area,
yeah, it's a really great. It's an open source editor.
Put an image.
And actually, Webflow.com is built on that, right? Okay. So they're using that open source editor for that. So my idea is to integrate that editor with Firebase. That's kind of my prototyping platform, as we will see from the website we threw up, right? So I like to use kind of put that into a React application that's built on top of Firebase, and just get something working, but from a no code workflow. To really make it for designers who don't really want to worry about the HTML and CSS. And the next step is, once we have that in place, to then build in like an AI layer on top of that. So then for people who are even designers, just the marketers, the business people, the people who have an idea, they want somebody to build it for them, but they don't know how to, so they could give them an IA to build that. So
yeah.
That was something that's something that I kind of have thinking. I am working on that from the visual designer standpoint, because I do think the idea of getting the design tools to the point where you don't have to worry about HTML, CSS, I do think it's going to get there. The tools have gotten better, and browsers are pretty compatible when it comes to HTML, CSS, even though CSS gets to be more and more complicated every year as we they add feature sets to it, But I do think the tools are going to get to the point where designers won't need to know how to do HTML and CSS. It should get there.
They just have to know how things relate and how types of content blocks.
Well, going back to your teaching codes how to visual program, that's where visual programming is going. Where once we can provide good visual interfaces to do a lot of the logic that you need, but then also from the back end, the AI will also kind of fill in the gaps there. I do believe that. So all as future developers, we're really still kind of have a good idea of how to program, but the way they're going to program might not be as much code. It's just going to be connecting widgets together and then having a computer kind of fill in the gaps.
Gotcha.
Don't you think that? You'll be out of job in let's say 20 years maybe.
I don't know. I mean, we keep on kind of going to higher levels of programming. Which
I joke about that, but I do think there's always going to be programmers. I think there's always going to be programmers. There's always going to be people who's writing that on kind of close, low level.
But we're making it more accessible. We're making things that would used to have required someone with a very specific technical, skill set, more accessible to people who don't have that skill set, and it's fine, Like, you don't have to be a mechanic to drive a car.
Which, as a front end developer and a user interface designer, that's what really interests me. I'm thinking about how can we make these interfaces easier for non-programmers, non-developers to make interactive applications or experiences, and be able to make that as accessible as possible.
Yeah. So we're basically 53 minutes into our hour podcast, and you answered my first question.
And I don't think we talked about anything else that we wanted to talk about today either.
Well, as I said, you answered my first question, which was, is there anything that you, as a developer, you want to build? Like that list? Because you have a list, I have a list, so this is your list. You want to build the
Well, number two on my list, besides the AI-driven design,
don't get there
is
yet.
what?
Don't get there yet. Now, I have a bunch on my list, and most are not something I'm going to be able to do in the near future. But one thing I should do is right now, if you go to my website, timlytle.net, it will take you directly to my Twitter profile because I am a web developer who does not even have his own website. So, and
mine's offline right now too. So.
You're all like, oh, I can write code to make this website. As me, now in my career, I'm like, could I just generate this as a static site and throw it up there someplace? I might want to change some content eventually, but man, I don't want to deal with hosting it anywhere. I just want to put HTML files someplace and let it go. And so that the whole concept of static sites really,
well, you have your
appeal to them.
Your GitHub pages, right?
Right. Yep. Just
that for you as a developer,
that image, and then push the content someplace. But yeah,
for you as a developer, I think there's a lot of good static site generators that do a good job of generating HTML. You can just throw up on a Google page as a commit, and you're good to go.
Yeah, and it's like it's not like you're necessarily writing the raw HTML. You can still use templating, but you have your content is static. It's not in a database someplace, and you add content files, and then you point some code at it and say, okay, build the site, and then deploy the site by just uploading it, which is really, if you think about it, similar to how we used to build websites when we would hand edit the HTML and upload it. It's just we're automating that process. We're generating the HTML. We're shipping it up. But that's something that is definitely on my more shorter term to-do list. But that leads into the fact that apparently we really are doing more than just talking, I guess, about having a podcast because we have a podcast site, right, Mark?
Tim, when I asked you to do this, I was serious. I was like, pedal to the metal. Let's just take this to the next level. Let's make this the greatest developer podcast on the internet.
I've never questioned your seriousness.
But you did question whether I'd be able to get the website up this week. I know you did
know
that.
What? There may have in the back of there may have been a little bit of a wonder at that. But we do it. What is it? It's devfridayshow.com.
Yep. I just have a bare bones site up here right now.
Not to be confused with a completely different thing, which is the Dev Fridays How. And that is where me and Mark show you how to have a Dev Fridays. But the devfridayshow.com is a completely different site.
My mind's being blown. Are you just launching something else around the Dev Friday show?
No, that's the Dev Fridays.
Is it something we could get some funding for?
Dev Friday show. They sound very similar and they're spelled almost the same.
Are we going to charge for this? Subscriptions?
Yeah. It's like me and Mark not teaching you something but pretending that we are. And that's the Dev Fridays How.
I got you.
The site that we just launched was the Dev Friday Show. And that is what is it a static site, I'm guessing?
Yeah, it's built on Gatsby. It's hosted on Firebase, which is Google's kind of their static hosting platform that gives you some basic hosting distributed on their own kind of content network. I like it because it's kind of it's a good platform that I think it's easy to use. Like the interfaces, I like the authentication, the NoSQL database that it has. So it kind of is a good platform that I'm comfortable with. That's primarily where I host most of my personal projects on. It's Gatsby, which is a platform that's built on top of React, right? So it's primarily built with just JavaScript. And
it's static in that the page is already rendered and shipped, but then it's pulling data from Firebase. Am I understanding that correctly?
Eventually it will be. That's why you when we said, okay, we should just throw up a page for the feed, right? You said, oh, just throw up a Google Pages, right? Let's get the feed started. It's like, yeah, that's a good, simple approach. But you know me, I got to think about where do I want to be, right? I'm believing the secret, Tim. I want to know where I'm going to be at. I want to know how successful I'm going to be with this, right? So I envision this site to not just be an RSS feed or a podcast 2.0 feed that we're going to be able to make a lot of money off of, but to actually be a great site for content, right? So along with, because we're doing the show
we can
with
still do that with static though. We don't need to pull that from a database. We can just commit it to GitHub.
True. Well, that's what we are doing because it's Markdown, right? So it's a static site. And I think, did you take a look at it yet?
I briefly looked at it. I couldn't.
All right, so let me briefly describe it. Like I said, I don't want to do a screen share.
Like a minute left, so
yes.
Go for it.
And so all you have to do is just, I believe
left.
I gave you access to the GitHub repository, right? You should be able to test that out and let me know if you have access to it.
I can, yes.
And then all I got to do is download that, look for the content directory, duplicate one of the markdown files. All you can do, change the markdown file, like make a new markdown file, push it up, you're good to go. Builds it, everything's done.
Perfect. So we got there. I saw we have both shows up.
So as a PHP developer, I think you can write some markdown. I think you can do that. All right, there you go.
So we have a website up there, devfridayshow.com. It has an RSS feed. Next week, maybe we'll be in the podcast apps.
Yes, my goal for next week is to be in the podcastindex.org index and also on iTunes. We'll get some art for the podcast. We'll make this legit.
All right,
We'll have version 2 in 1 week,
and we'll talk. Maybe next week we'll talk about me getting back into podcasts. See you then.